Boards often treat good governance as a matter of experience. Find experienced trustees, give them enough information, run good meetings, make sensible decisions. Sounds simple. But capable people can still think together in ways that don't support good governance. Sometimes everyone has the information, but nobody really understands what matters. Sometimes boards' questions are intelligent, but they're aimed at the wrong thing. And sometimes boards can't quite imagine anything beyond the current situation. And sometimes the conversation becomes strangely political. Sometimes everyone is busy, but the board never actually reaches the work that only the board can do. And sometimes nobody is quite sure who owns the next step. Very different symptoms, but the same underlying problem. Attention has drifted away from the work of the board. Take information. Many years ago, I consulted with organisations in the oil and gas industry, and the reporting culture there fascinated me. Management might receive 30 pages of spreadsheets, thousands of numbers. Everything was technically accurate. And somewhere on page 15 there might be one number that completely changed the story. A pressure trend in the pipeline, the supply issue, an emerging risk. Nobody highlighted it, nobody drew a box around it, nobody said, this is the number that really matters. And presenting every number felt safer than owning the judgment behind it. If all the information is there, nobody could accuse you of leaving anything out. It's a way of saying, the information was there. The irony was that the management often left the meeting less informed than when it started. Not because there wasn't enough information, but because nobody had reduced the uncertainty. And that's why the first principle isn't really about information, it's about orientation. It answers 4 questions. Where are we? Why does it matter? What belongs to us? And what judgment are we being asked to make? We simply call that inform. But orientation isn't enough. You can understand the situation perfectly and still ask poor questions. Boards ask questions all the time. Some illuminate, some simply defend an existing position. Some reveal assumptions, others quietly reinforce them. Some questions open up thinking. Others are really just arguments wearing a question mark. That's the difference. Inquiry isn't about asking more questions, it's about asking questions that help the board notice something that it couldn't see before. We call that inquire. Even after a board understands the presentation and has tested its assumptions, another problem appears. The present begins to feel inevitable. This is just how it's always been done. Now governance isn't suffering from poor information or poor questions. It's suffering from a lack of imagination. Different problem, different intervention, expanding the space of possibility. Good governance isn't only about understanding today's reality, it's about asking what tomorrow could become, what future is beginning to emerge that we haven't yet made room for. We call that inspire. And even when people know what matters and they ask good questions, they may still hesitate because they're protecting themselves, watching the chair, trying not to sound foolish, working out whether it's safe to disagree. Think how much attention is being spent navigating status and politics rather than the issue itself. The discussion has become unnecessarily difficult. That's not a motivation problem, that's a design problem. And we use the term enjoy. When people first see this card, they sometimes laugh. Governance should be enjoyable, but that's not really the point. Enjoy doesn't mean entertainment. It means reducing unnecessary cognitive cost. Some governance conversations should be difficult. They involve uncertainty, competing priorities, and complex judgment. You can't remove that difficulty, and you shouldn't try. But another kind of difficulty serves no purpose at all. Confusing papers, hidden expectations, unclear boundaries, status games, trying to work out who's allowed to say what, second-guessing how your contribution will be received. None of that helps the board make better decisions. It simply consumes attention that ought to be available for the work. The difficult part of governance should come from the issue, not from the politics in the room. And that's what Enjoy is really about, reducing unnecessary friction so people can invest their thinking where it matters most. But freeing attention isn't the end of the story. It raises another question. Where should that attention go? A board can spend 3 hours in a meeting and still never reach the work that only the board can do. Listening to updates, reviewing operational details, hearing presentations, discussing matters that should have been resolved long before they reached the agenda. Everyone is busy, but not necessarily busy in governance. That's a different problem. The intervention isn't to make people participate more. It's to direct collective attention towards the judgments only the board can make. What decisions are we here to make? What risks are ours to own? What belongs to leadership instead? When attention is directed towards the right work, governance becomes much more than just oversight. It becomes purposeful. We call that engage. And once the board has focused its attention on the right work, one final challenge remains. What happens next? One of the most common frustrations in governance is leaving a meeting with a sense that something important happened, but nobody's quite sure who owns it. The discussion was good, the decision felt sensible, but responsibility maybe remained a bit blurred. People hesitate because they're not sure where their authority begins or ends. Leaders wait for another board meeting. Committees assume that someone else is dealing with it. The board quietly drifts back into management because nobody is confident enough to act. Again, that's not really a people problem, it's a design problem. Good governance creates clarity about ownership. Who decides? Who acts? Who's accountable? When people understand those boundaries, they don't need constant permission. They can exercise judgment confidently within them. That's what we mean by empower. So those are the 6 principles. Not 6 values, not 6 personality traits, not 6 steps to follow in any particular order. They're 6 different interventions that solve 6 recurring problems in collective thinking. Sometimes a board needs greater clarity, sometimes better questions, sometimes a wider sense of possibility, sometimes less friction, sometimes a sharper focus on governance, and sometimes clearer ownership. The art isn't applying all 6 at once. It's recognizing which intervention the conversation needs next. That's also why this framework works beyond boards. Whether you're leading a school, working with a leadership team, designing professional learning, or teaching in a classroom, the context changes, but people are still directing attention, asking questions, imagining possibilities, managing mental effort, focusing on meaningful work and exercising agency. The language may change, human cognition doesn't. And that's why these 6 principles sit at the heart of the framework. They describe the conditions under which groups think well together. And when you understand that, the cards stop being a collection of ideas. They become a practical way to design better conversations.